It's me, Eugene Clark, and I am with the famous Matt Faulkner, illustrator extraordinaire.
Oh, you mean me?
But you're not just an illustrator. We've already established early on in our podcast, so you, the viewer, you have to go back and watch some of the early ones.
Yeah.
This man is also a fine artist.
Mm-hmm.
Fine artist. What is it all about? Earlier episode, we compare fine arts, illustration, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But here we are to talk about.
Okay, hold on. Eugene Clark, fine artist and professor emeritus extraordinaire. Okay.
Thank you, Matt Faulkner.
Yeah,
it's always a pleasure to bask in those words from you, even though my employers will never ever give me that title.
Yeah.
But I digress.
Yeah.
It's not about those people. It's about us.
It's about us.
And they're not here. This isn't their podcast. It's our podcast.
Yeah. In this university, Save World Make Art University, Professor Emeritus Eugene right there.
Whoop, 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 whoop. Okay, so Mr. Faulkner, you were so gracious to recommend an artist that we are going to discuss today at great lengths. Would you like to introduce said artist?
I would. The artist that I requested be our hero of the day, of the week, is none other than American action painter, dun dun dun, Jackson Pollock.
Woo!
Thank you, Jackson Pollock, for
now.
Yeah, go ahead.
I did see a movie about his life with Ed Harris, and it was quite good. Did you see that?
I did, yeah. I saw it before you asked me to take that lecture for you.
So we backtracked this to about maybe 4 years ago when there was a theater in West Bloomfield called the Burnham, and they were putting on a lecture series, and they're a very big theater with big projection. And they needed someone to present a lecture on a couple different artists. One of them was Leonardo da Vinci, which I got to do. And then the other one was Jackson Pollock, which you were gracious to accept.
Right.
Because come to find out, Jackson Pollock is a part of your past in terms of your art heroes and study and all that good stuff.
Well, I mean, one of the things, and we'll talk a little bit about this because of his influences, one of his prime teachers, his mentor, actually. Look, 150 years from now, I don't think anybody's going to be saying, oh my goodness, I can't look at that piece of art because it's illustration and I only look at fine art. Ain't nobody going to care. And who cares if you're enjoying what you're doing, right? If you're doing what you're doing because, oh my goodness, I'm supposed to, do this so that I could have respect. Is that joy? I don't think that's joy. Okay. So Jackson Pollock, we'll say straight up, he had a interesting early life. He was born in Cody, Wyoming. And I think his dad died when he was young and maybe his mom married again. But anyways, they moved to LA and he ended up getting kicked out of high school a couple of times. Now, the thing is, though, I mean, so he was like a rebel without a cause type of guy, but in the 1930s, which is weird. I mean, he actually had like shoulder length hair when he was a kid. So this is weird. Like, how did he get away with that and not have all of
and you know what? It really feels good to have hair. I just want you to know. It feels great.
Who needs hair? Anyway.
My hair's getting longer and I'm ready to. It needs a haircut badly. But as I was combing my hair this morning, I said, it feels good to have a hair. Because I'm not going to turn around and scare the viewers, but there is a giant non-hair spot.
Yeah. See, I had always said to myself, see, it's starting to go here on me. Anyways, let's not, we do have a Save World Make Art hero in Jackson Pollock, who was also bald. Okay. Let's just say it. Yeah. All right. Started off with long hair.
Real artists
are bald.
Bald.
Okay. So we're going to jump right to, I'm going to show a picture of, I'll share it in a second here. Let me find it first. No, that's not what I wanted. And where'd you go? There it is. Okay, I'm going to show a picture from his, there it is. So let me get back to Zoom, share, advanced. Yeah, we're advanced technologically here. Okay, so, and there is Jackson doing his work, which this, so he moved to New York City from LA with his brother and started to study at the Art Students League. I think that was it. And he met his mentor, a guy named Thomas Hart Benton. Now, what you can see from here right now, whether you have an understanding or an education of the movements of art through, in particular in the United States, through the last century, you probably have a feeling for, I've seen this kind of painting before. Some people are overwhelmed and love it. Some people think it's funny. I could give a can of paint to a dog and strap the brush to the dog's tail and make that artwork. You can hear all sorts of opinions about what this is. And then when you hear that his mentor was a muralist, a guy that actually went around during the 1930s and made paintings like this. That's Thomas Hart Benton's artwork. And so this is the kind of work that the kind of what's the approach to the two-dimensional surface that he was taught. And he wasn't great at it. That was the other thing. We learned that his brother was a better actually draftsperson than Jackson Pollock. But the issue being, and we talked about this before, the idea that it doesn't really matter that who's the fine artist and who's the a figurative painter, a person like Benton who painted this, who is telling a story with the imagery, or if, as in Jackson Pollock's work, he is talking about an emotional experience in his work. Is one better than the other? I don't think it matters, as I said before. But we're talking about Jackson's approach and his what he was trying to say, or what he was saying. And so this is moving to me. This one is called Eyes in the Heat. Eyes in the Heat. And the interesting thing too is that, and I'll finish with this one, Eugene, he didn't name his works. He called them canvas number 11, canvas 32. We're going to show one of his most famous works in a second here, and that one was called, I think, version 11. And so it's interesting that he didn't want to give any kind of narrative, not even a name, to give people the need to start to think that there was supposed to be a meaning to this. Each person could derive whatever they wanted from it, and he wanted to have as little influence on that besides what the person looked at. That's important to me. What do you think?
Well, I don't claim to know everything about this artist, although as an art student, we were able to study his work in art history, and you would encounter his pieces in any museum collection that had a more contemporary part to the museum, which most do. And you rarely would walk into that part of the museum without seeing at least one Jackson Pollock. So I came to have a connection to his work just based on the fact that I felt like I was always seeing it. And what I've come to learn over the years is that you're absolutely right. What you said earlier about people that might not be educated about art, but probably have seen something done by this artist. There's very few artists that I can think of that are synonymous with their style. Like when you say Picasso, people right away sort of have a vision in their mind of what you're talking about. Even if it's, his more abstract work rather than his cubist work, or rather than his collage work, or rather than his early, more realistic work. They have an image in their mind, and they go, aha, yes, Picasso. When you say Jackson Pollock, even if someone doesn't recognize that name, and then you say, the splatter painting, oh yeah, like I've got to believe that just like Picasso, Jackson Pollock is one of those people that comes to most people's mind. They recognize it right away in terms of he is connected to his style. He's known with that style. And then the other one would be Van Gogh, just in terms of, the way he painted in Starry, Starry Night, and people's recognition of that particular style as being a Van Gogh style. Even if it's 5 other impressionist painters that they're looking at, they'll say, oh yeah, Van Gogh, because, it's those bold strokes. So it's just really cool that of all the artists from this period, for Jackson Pollock to sort of be elevated to that stature. Thomas Hart Benton, for all of his illustrious, amazing work, he doesn't have that same emotion or connection with the general public. You'd have to really explain. And then if you said, oh, he was the teacher of Jackson Pollock. Oh, teacher of Jackson Pollock. Oh, okay. You know what I mean? And it's just so crazy to think, when you see the film about his life and what he went through and his battle with, depression and alcohol and any number of things, and how he wanted to quit so many times. And the woman that you mentioned earlier, maybe off camera, Lee Krasner, who ended up they became married, husband and wife. She too was an artist. Another one of those sagas where you have this dominant male who receives all the accolades, and a female artist who's equally as great, but sort of falls by the wayside. And I'm talking about, like, when you think of Camille Claudel with Rodin, when you think of Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So, but what we get from this whole joining of these 2 amazing artists is this work that we're looking at right now. And to think about the impact that this work had. And, I had to sort of do one of those moments earlier when I was going back and studying when some of these paintings were made, and thinking, wow, I always connected his work with the 60s, but I am completely off. And his work is done much earlier than that. So you're looking at, 30s, 40s, 50s. And that really caught my attention because, it helps me to recognize how long we've been exposed to non-representational artwork. And I think, like you said, what's cool is the artist that you are and the work that you produce, the output that you bring out, which is so amazing and beautiful, and the technical side of what you do, it just blows my mind, as it does many people. But yeah, you have this appreciation for someone like this, that you said people go, I could tie a brush to my dog's tail, and they could do that. Like, how do you, as the type of artist that you are, or Thomas Hart Benton was, how do you find the appreciation for one said Jackson Pollock? That's my question to you.
Okay, I get it. So let me ask you, I'm gonna, this is a question for both of us. When you look at this piece that we're looking at, right? What thing stands out for you? What 2 things stand out for you? And I'll go first, okay?
Yeah.
The first one is, the first thing I'll see, and I use the cursor. I keep looking at this thing right here. Can you see the cursor there and what I'm circling?
Yeah. Yep.
I don't know why. Now, it could be because I've already had, as a alliterative A to Z storytelling kind of image maker. When I'm told this painting is called the eyes in the heat, I'm that kind of looks like an eye to me. Okay.
Yeah.
So there is that part of me that, as like I said, a visual storyteller, I'm looking for the story. Okay. And this kind of painting is really confusing. And if I'm not careful, frustrating. But if I allow it to be, it's delightful in that it doesn't offer me a story. It offers me an experience. Okay.
Yeah.
So that leads to the second part, which is when I squint and look at this, there is a black, a thick black line that is woven into the other colors that are overlapping this. It seems like that there is this intelligence that put this together, that it wove this thick black line, and it um, I just get the feeling that the person who did it, it can look like it was done just through drips and that it was without intention. On the other hand, it could look like somebody really smart did this.
Yeah.
And so okay, so I'm done with that, but I just want to say, yes, you can see, if I squint, you can see, I'm going to have the cursor go follow this line. It's as if this black line is woven in, through, and under and over. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's
Definitely.
fascinating to me. But it's about the experience and the texture and the woven, like a tapestry that made out of light, that is fascinating to me. And I'm done.
Yeah. What's great now, I remember in the film learning that he created many different series of works that were a complete departure from what he eventually became known for, which was these splatter paintings. I have a feeling that this was done a little bit pre-splatter paintings, because I do see the thing that you pointed out, and in many spots in this piece, I feel like there was maybe an attempt on his part to try and implement things that would appear eye-like, that
Yeah.
are sort of hidden within the
Like right
overall.
there.
And yeah, and so in seeing that, the reason why I point that out is because, Picasso's work, although it is abstract, when you research the definition of abstraction, the definition talks about how the true definition of abstraction is imagery that is based off of reality. That's why in a piece done by Picasso, you can see the edge of a face, you can see a shoulder, you can see the neck of a guitar, you can see the side of a vase or part of a flower. But all those things are sort of broken up and then they're brought together in this, what we call abstraction. So I feel like, if Picasso was doing that, and then you have an artist like Pollock, I've got to believe that some of that was done maybe sort of in that same vein, where true abstraction is based off of reality. Therefore, those eyes are going to be meaningful. He's just going to paint a whole bunch of them, but they become so lost, they almost look more like marks than not, because of the mastery that he had of this style. But that's what's intriguing to me. And this work reminds me of another contemporary, Robert Rauschenberg, who was another artist that we had to study a lot in school. And what I found interesting about both artists is that I feel like the end result of their piece, they didn't have a preconceived notion of what the outcome was going to be.
Right.
So therefore, it was like you said, not only are we having an experience looking at it, but for them, the actual making of the piece was an experience. Therefore, the piece is more about that experience than it is about trying to come up with this, you know, thing that's so meaningful at the end. And one of the reasons why I say that is because I remember hearing Robert Rauschenberg and also reading Pollock's very similar response to questions about what his work is about. Both of these guys spent more time focusing on, you know, when they were asked the question, you know, it's really about me doing this thing, standing back, and then trying to figure out what it means.
Right.
And I love that because, you know, I went to art school in the 80s, and postmodernism was one of the things that we had to talk about quite a bit. It was on the scene. And I can't tell you in terms of conceptualism and how much was read into everything. And a lot of it, I'm sorry, there's room for conceptualism, but there's a lot of crapola when it comes. A lot of people, the critics were making words up for each other. Interiority, did you ever hear that word?
No.
Well, that was one. That was one that I remember. So yeah, it's refreshing to look at this work and think that it's about the process, it's about the experience, and then we as viewers get to live that experience through the painting as we see it today.
Yeah, good. Interiority. I like that. Couple of things. Last thing I'll say about this one too is that when I look at this piece, I can see the entirety of it is a world, that this is a world in and of itself. But then as I go into the detail of certain places, that's another little world within it. So it's a word that I heard from one of my teachers, fractals, that fractals are the ever smaller, it's the same pattern from the larger pattern going down into smaller and smaller patterns. They're similar kinds of expressions within the greater expression. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that's really interesting to me, that I can look at that right there and I could try to figure that out all day long. There's something going on in there that's pretty interesting to me. And I just like being able to, as an illustrator, look at this and not think that I have to tell a story. So let me just show too, also the, I'm going to look at that in a second. This is what he was doing, is this was a big deal, that he put the canvas on the floor and he dripped the painting. And he was called, the terms were action painter, right? That he was an American action painter, but that also he called it the big drip. That's what he called this style. Now, one of the things too is that when I see him put his foot on the canvas, I'm like, oh, don't do that. You're going to get a shoe print on there. But that's kind of interesting too, because when I look at the canvases, I often look, okay, where does his knee or his shoe actually make a mark on the canvas too? Because it must in certain places.
You know, one thing we have to talk about with this work is he's utilizing raw canvas. There's no gesso that is protecting the acidity of the material into the canvas itself, which then, of course, causes paint over time to fall off the canvas. And so his work is a great example of a curator's nightmare, because every morning before the museum opens, they're sweeping up part of the painting that fell on the floor the night before.
Wow.
And part of that is because when you think about how World War II ended with the nuclear explosion, and once that moment occurred in our mind as human beings and we realized that we could extinguish ourselves, what happened with a lot of artists like Jackson Pollock and people that worked on raw canvas, they were not as concerned about longevity for their work, because part of our thinking, that's why people built bomb shelters in their backyard. We thought that maybe we weren't going to be around that much longer. We thought, you know, other countries are building nuclear weapons. What's stopping a nuclear war from beginning?
Yep.
So
And
why should we make work that's going to last?
yeah, and the temporary nature, that's one of the things that actually, there was a sale of, I think, of a Brian Ferry. No, what's his name? The contemporary guy who paints things on the sides of buildings and then nobody knows who did it. I forget
Oh,
his
Shepherd Ferry.
Shepherd Ferry. He sold a piece like 5 years ago, and it was set up on top of some kind of machine at the auction. And when the person bought it, the painting slipped through the frame and down into the machine and got shredded. And that was part of the sale. I guess it didn't get shredded all the way. It stopped about halfway through, and that was the thing, was the
Wow.
experience of
Uh,
that's the art. And
yeah.
you just
Well,
spent
just to tie in with
$45,000.
what you're saying, I don't remember the name of the artist. I think he was English. And I think this happened in England, but the artist set up an easel, a table with a palette, paint rags all over the place, a couple styrofoam cups, It looked like an artist's studio that someone had left and it was messy. But it was sitting in an art gallery, and the night cleaning person came and tidied it up and threw the rags and cups away and things. And then later on was reprimanded because that was part of an installation that
Yeah.
because of this artist, it was worth in the millions.
Yeah. Oops.
And so it was quite a, as you can imagine.
God. Well, so yeah, that just I really like also hearing that thing, Eugene, about as a curator, you got to go and clean up all the scraps off of the floor every night. I mean, how do they address that? Do they put some kind of sealant over the paintings? Do they send in biochemists to come in and like they did in the Sistine ceiling and remove all of the wax so that we get to see the original colors that Michael, or is that a sin too? Should we leave the colors as they were because that is part of the art, that time applied?
Yeah, I feel like these works are going to fall in the same category as Polaroid photos, where, if you have old Polaroid photos and you pull them out of a box, they're much lighter than they were, when they first were developed, because they're not meant to last forever.
Yep.
And we all have, those of us that have boxes of photos, we all have photos like that you pull out and you're like, I can't see this as well. So I just think that eventually his work and other artists from that time, it's just going to gradually become a different looking piece.
Yeah. Well, I think too that I would bet that this piece does not look like it did in 1951 or when it was made. It feels a little bit dulled over time, that the paint has faded a little bit. So we again, we're coming to the end of our time, but let me just show this piece, which there it is. This is his most famous work, or the one that everybody, oh yeah, that's Pollock. It's called, I think it was called Image Number 11 or something of that nature. I just wish Zoom would be more friendly about moving this frame around because it's really frustrating. Let's just leave it like that. Anyway, yeah. This is the name that it was given eventually is Blue Poles, like telephone poles, blue poles. So that starts to turn it into an illustration. Once you say blue poles, you're looking for telephone poles in a landscape, and I don't think that that's what he was doing.
I've seen this scene up north in Michigan here when you get up past Grayling, and any area that's wooded, you walk through and you're going to see this exact scene right here.
Yeah, in autumn. Okay, so now that we have that though, right? Like our mind has said, this is a landscape. Okay. Now this is one of the things for me that is fascinating about is the experience of fine art as an illustrator. It's definitely switching from some part of the brain to another, left to right, right to left, I don't know what it is, and say it's not a landscape.
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, I think if you can separate people's opinions by calling it something like blue poles, if you can separate that from, the trueness of the way that we should be looking at these works, then you'll have a different experience overall, which is, I think, the experience that we should be having, like you said, where we shouldn't have to determine any fixed notion of what this is.
Yeah, and you can, but you see, that's the thing too, is like, Eugene, you can look at this as a landscape. You can call it blue poles. It's a bunch of telephone poles. It's a bunch of pine trees in front of maple trees that are turning color in mid-October up above Grayling, right?
Yeah.
But it's really trippy once you've done that to say it's something else
Right.
and let it be whatever it is without insisting that it has to tell a story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was in school, and I did some work like this, where I call them atmospheric imagery. A lot of it was charcoal drawing, but there were a lot of people working. I had a teacher that worked this way, and many classmates, where it was more about just these. The best word is atmospheric, because it was just, these flowing forms that were, interweaving throughout each other. And, that taught me a lot about looking at work like this. So I look at it like it's something happening, the way that we look up into the sky at night and look at the planets.
Yep.
We don't see those things as finite or as captured in a space. We see them as ever going, right? So that's how I see this work.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. But you can look at it as finite. That's what I'm saying, is like, for me, I can look at the stars and I'll say, well, they're going to always be there. Just that, looking at the Big Dipper or Orion's belt, it's like, that's always the way it is. When in fact, there's another way to tell that story. It is a bunch of fiery orbs that are 400 billion times bigger than our sun, rushing at each other, ready to implode. Wow, okay, that's different. And so for me, that again, I want to say that it's like, for me, it's like traveling from one side of the brain to the other. One side wants a concrete story that it can rely upon and not have to worry that it's going to shift. And the other part of the brain is like, wow, we're going on a roller coaster right here, and this is freaking weird. And I love that, So the last thing I wanted to say about him too is that he did this piece, I think it was in the late 40s or the early 50s. It was purchased by the National Museum of Australia, and it caused a big ruckus there, because a lot of people said, why would we have this piece? Again, there were probably people who were like, this is not like a painting of a bunch of fruit. I don't understand it. So there were people there who didn't like it. And then there were also people there who said, this wasn't done by an Australian. Why do we have this in our net? But it is now like one of the centerpieces of that museum. So that's just interesting to me. And lastly, this guy painted this 70 years ago, almost 60 some odd years ago. And so it's still revolutionary. And there are still people who are trying to figure out, like, how do we move on from this? Where do we go from this? If I paint like this, am I being reactionary? Am I going backwards in time? Because it still looks like, wow, what is this?
My work is very abstract. In the recent work that I've been working on for probably the last 20 years, it's very, very abstract. And I have such a background of working very traditional, and realistic. And I remember wrestling with what I felt like when I was moving out of my very traditional, realistic style and trying to evolve into something like this, where, quite frankly, you personally have to deal with, you have to give yourself permission and say, you know what, it's okay for me to not draw something that people are going to recognize. It's okay for me to play with color and play with forms and play with space. And it's okay. Like, I felt like I needed to do that. I needed to give myself permission because um, for such a long time, and even today, people place recognizable imagery somewhere up here on this pedestal for some reason. But yet we have guys like Jackson Pollock, like you said, when this piece was purchased in Australia, it was sort of frowned upon. But now, years later, it's it's revered as like one of the greatest moments in modern art history. So that to me is such a coup in the art world, that we're alive at this time when we can see that happen.
Yeah, and it's an one last thing I'll say too is I think he sold this for like 3 grand.
I
Um,
bet.
and then within a very short period of time, it was worth millions of dollars.
Wow.
And he
Like,
died. He did have, you know, real difficulty with alcoholism, and he died in a car crash on his own. He was drunk, and so you know that does not mean that's one of the things in traditional American approach to art is that, yeah, if you're going to be an artist too, though, you're going to probably either follow the vein of Van Gogh and lop your ear off and hand it to mom and tell her happy birthday, or you're going to die a drunk and in a car wreck that you caused. Um, that's to me, that's something I have to unweave from my telling of what you know, to be free is in and of itself a gift that I give to myself. And the cost for his freedom was not his alcoholism. The core of his reason for being able to make works. Sorry, I'm looking at this this thing here. The core of his being able to make things like this is not that he was sick, an alcoholic. This it's not the sick tree that makes the best apples. Um, which is part of what I think Western art is trying to say about being an artist. You got to be crazy in order to make really great stuff. I think that this was the healthiest part of him expressing something wonderful. And I'll just leave it at that.
yeah, I like what you said, and quite frankly, I don't think. Uh, I think that whether he was addicted to alcohol or drugs, you know, I feel like this work is going to come out, whether that's part of the equation. And a lot of people probably will disagree with me, but I just think that that other stuff was part of the deal because look, being in the art world is not easy, just like being an actor and in Hollywood. When you're an artist, you're an artist, and when you're in that world, you have your road with the hard knocks that creep up on you constantly. So that is probably what was perpetually leading him to feel like drinking. But this was probably the truest part of who he was.
Yeah.
And it was going to come out this way no matter what.
Yeah, in the 1940s and 50s, just look at some of the advertising back then. And to be a free spirit like this, another guy who died early, Jack Kerouac, the writer, this can be an expression of honesty. There's a great line from a poem by, I think the guy's name is Ruka. What is madness but the nobility of soul at odds with the circumstance? And the circumstances of the 1940s and 50s was of you get in line, get in your cubicle and be quiet and do what you're told. And that can make somebody who is all about freedom and honesty go a little bit crazy. So yeah.
Without people like Jackson Pollock, I wouldn't be the person that I am and the artist that I am today. I took a big risk like you did at a point where, you just 100% bought into the notion that, hey, I can survive doing this. for me, not only did I have that notion, but also for me to embrace the strange activity that I saw within my work and find it to be valid and valuable to me personally. Like, I look at Pollock as that person that really helped to pave that way for people like me to stand here today and be able to talk about him. I'm so grateful. I think this is one of the greatest gifts that came out of the turn of the century, when we had all of this industrial revolution, and suddenly, our planet has never been the same, with pollution and all those kind of things. But out of that came work like this that was now part of the fabric of who we are and our way we thought, where up to that point we didn't have stuff like this.
I'm going to stop sharing. We have gone, once again, we've gone twice the amount of time we said we were going to, Eugene.
Bravo! Well, don't pick artists like Jackson Pollock. Jeez, there's a lot to talk about.
Never again. Never again. No more good artists.
All right, folks. Well, as Matt sings us out.
Yeah. Well, the kin folks said, just move away from there. Said, California is the place you ought to be. So they loaded up the Beverly Hills, that is. Swimming pools. Movie stars.
The Beverly Hills. This is my mini banjo. Mr. Faulkner, thanks for joining us again on Save World Make Art. That's Mr. Matt Faulkner. I'm Eugene Clark. We'll see you on our next episode.
And the bubbling crew.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Yeah.